Have you ever looked back at an ordinary day and realized it was the last normal day of your life? Mine started with a spelling test. I spent the morning helping 8-year-olds figure out the difference between there and there. One little boy proudly wrote both words wrong, then smiled like he'd just solved world peace. I laughed. The whole class laughed. Looking back, I think that was the last time I laughed without wondering what was coming next. Because by 6:17 that evening, everything I believed about my family was gone. It had been raining since lunch. The kind of cold Oregon rain that never really falls hard, just refuses to stop. I unlocked the front door of my little house, dropped my school bag onto the hallway floor, and kicked off my shoes. The silence greeted me the way it always did. No husband, no children, no television playing in the background, just an old house, and a woman who'd convinced herself she preferred it that way. People at work used to ask why I'd never married. I always smiled, always gave the same answer. I guess I never met the right person. It was easier than explaining the truth. When the first person you ever lose is your mother, you quietly spend the rest of your life preparing to lose everyone else. So eventually, you stop letting people get close enough to leave. I had become very good at that. I was halfway to the kitchen when someone knocked. 3 slow knocks. Not loud, not impatient, almost careful. I looked at the clock above the stove. 6:17 p.m. I remember the exact time because I've replayed that moment in my head 1,000 times. First I ignored it. No one ever came by without calling. Then came 3 more knocks. Exactly the same. Steady. Measured. As if whoever stood outside already knew I was home. A strange feeling settled in my stomach. Not fear. Recognition. The kind you can't explain. Like hearing a song you haven't heard since childhood. I walked back toward the front door and looked through the peephole. An elderly man stood beneath a black umbrella. Gray suit. Dark overcoat. Polished shoes untouched by the mud. One hand rested on a worn leather briefcase. The other held the umbrella perfectly still. He wasn't checking his watch. He wasn't looking around. He was simply waiting. As though he'd waited for this moment. For years. I opened the door just enough to speak. "Can I help you?" The man smiled politely. Not warmly. Not coldly. Just like someone who had rehearsed this conversation 100 times. "Rachel Bennett?" "Yes. My name is Arthur Whitmore." His voice was calm. Professional. "But I imagine your mother called me Arthur." The world seemed to stop. Every sound. Every thought. Every breath. I stared at him. "My mother died 20 years ago." "I know." He nodded gently. "I was there." A chill climbed my spine. "I handled her final affairs." Before I could answer, he opened the briefcase. Inside, wrapped in a clear protective sleeve, was a single cream-colored envelope. Its paper had faded with age. Its corners were slightly worn. Across the front, written in graceful blue ink, were 7 words. "For Rachel, on your 32nd birthday." My knees nearly gave out. I knew that handwriting. I hadn't seen it since I was 12 years old, but I would have recognized it anywhere. My mother's. Arthur carefully held the envelope, just out of my reach. Then he quietly said the sentence that shattered the next 20 years of my life. "Your mother didn't ask me to deliver this after she died." A long pause. Rain tapped softly against the umbrella. Then he finished. "She asked me to deliver it on the one day she believed you would finally be strong enough to survive the truth." I reached for the envelope. Arthur didn't let go. Instead, he looked directly into my eyes and said, "Before you read your mother's first letter, you need to answer one question." I frowned. "What question?" He took a slow breath, then asked, "Rachel, what if the story you've believed about your mother's death for the last 20 years was never the whole truth?" The envelope was only inches away. 20 years had been reduced to a single piece of paper. My mother's handwriting. My name. My birthday. Every instinct told me to grab it. And said, Arthur quietly slipped it back into the briefcase. I stared at him. "What are you doing?" He closed the brass lock with a soft click. "Following your mother's instructions." I felt my patience disappear. "You've already found me. You've already shown me the letter." So give it to me. I can't. His voice never changed. Not yet. I folded my arms. You just told me my mother planned this for 20 years. And now you're telling me I can't even read it? Arthur looked directly at me. Your mother didn't leave me a letter to deliver. She left me a process. I frowned. A process. 10 instructions. Each one depended on the last. The room suddenly felt colder. You expect me to believe my mother planned all of this? I don't expect you to believe anything. He answered calmly. I expect you to decide after you've seen the evidence. He reached into his briefcase again. This time, he removed a thin leather folder. No labels. No writing. Just one faded elastic band holding it shut. He placed it on my kitchen table. You may open this. I looked at the envelope, then at the folder. What's inside? The first reason your mother believed you weren't ready. My hands hesitated. Part of me wanted to throw him out. Another part, the 12-year-old girl who had spent 20 years wishing for one more conversation with her mother, couldn't stop. I slowly removed the elastic band. Inside were newspaper clippings, hospital records, insurance forms. Everything was neatly organized. The top page caught my attention immediately. It was a newspaper article. The headline read, "Local woman dies after late-night highway accident." There was a photograph. My mother. Smiling. Exactly the way I remembered her. My chest tightened. I've seen this. Arthur nodded. So has everyone. I turned the page. Another newspaper. Different publication. Same date. Different headline. Beloved mother lost to tragic crash. I frowned. Why are there two? Keep reading. The third article made my heartbeat slow. Not because of what it said. Because of what it didn't. There was no mention of a crash. Instead, it read, "Local teacher dies following sudden medical emergency." I blinked. Then looked at Arthur. No. He said nothing. I grabbed the first article again. Car accident. Second article. Car accident. Third article. Medical emergency. 3 newspapers. Same woman. Same week. 2 completely different causes of death. This doesn't make any sense. It didn't to me either. Arthur spoke quietly. Until your mother explained why. I looked at him. So which one is true? His answer came almost immediately. That's the wrong question. Silence filled the kitchen. Rain continued tapping against the windows. Arthur folded his hands on top of the briefcase. The right question is why someone wanted the world to believe she died in a completely different way. My mouth went dry. For 20 years, I believed my mother's death was the one thing no one could argue about. People don't misremember funerals, death certificates, obituaries. Yet somehow, 3 different newspapers had reported 3 different stories. One of them had to be lying. Maybe 2. But newspapers don't invent causes of death. Someone gave them different information. I looked back at Arthur. My voice was barely above a whisper. Who changed the story? Arthur didn't answer. Instead, he stood up, walked toward the rain-covered window, pulled one corner of the curtain aside, and quietly asked, "Rachel, do you know that blue sedan parked across the street?" I frowned. I've never seen it before. Arthur kept looking outside. I was afraid you'd say that. Without taking his eyes off the window, Arthur spoke one sentence that made every hair on my arm stand up. It's been following me for 3 days. A long pause. Then he looked at me. And now it's waiting for you. I moved beside Arthur and looked through the rain-covered window. Across the street, a dark blue sedan sat beneath a maple tree. Its headlights were off. The engine wasn't running. It looked ordinary, almost forgettable. If someone's watching us, I whispered, why don't we call the police? Arthur didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slowly let the curtain fall back into place. Because I don't know whether they're watching you. He looked directly at me. Or protecting you. The sentence settled over the room like a heavy blanket. What does that even mean? It means I stopped assuming people's intentions a long time ago. For the first time since he'd arrived, Arthur looked genuinely uneasy. Not frightened. Regretful. As soon as I contacted you 3 days ago, he said, Someone broke into my office. My heart skipped. They stole something? No. Nothing valuable was taken. He paused. They searched. For what? They opened every filing cabinet, every storage box, every safe. But they only touched one file. He rested his hand on the briefcase. Your mother's. A chill crept through me. They knew. They've always known the file exists. I swallowed hard. They just didn't know where I'd hidden it. Silence filled the kitchen. I suddenly understood why Arthur had looked over his shoulder twice before walking inside. He hadn't been paranoid. He'd been careful. Very careful. Arthur unlocked the briefcase again. This time, he removed the envelope. He held it with both hands almost reverently. This is letter 1. Your mother wrote 7. 1 for today. The others. He shook his head. We'll discuss them later. You mean there are 6 more? Yes. And you've had all of them for 20 years? I gave your mother my word. He looked at me with tired eyes. And some promises outlive the people who make them. Very gently, he placed the envelope into my hands. The paper felt surprisingly heavy. Not because of its weight. Because it had crossed 20 years just to reach me. For a long moment, I couldn't bring myself to break the seal. What if I don't like what's inside? Arthur gave the smallest smile. Your mother expected that. I finally opened it. The paper inside was folded twice. The ink had faded slightly, but the handwriting was unmistakable. My dearest Rachel, if you're reading this. Then Arthur kept his promise. I knew he would. The first thing I need you to know is that I loved you every single day. I wasn't allowed to watch you grow. Never mistake my absence for a lack of love. My vision blurred. A tear landed on the page. I kept reading. Before you believe anything else, believe this. Your father loved you. I frowned. Why would she write that? I turned to Arthur. Why would Mom start with Dad? He didn't answer. I looked back at the letter. The next line stole the air from my lungs. But love and truth are not always the same thing. My heartbeat quickened. I read faster. Everything you've been told about the week I died is incomplete. Not false. Incomplete. If you want the whole truth, you must begin with the place your father has avoided for 20 years. There was one final sentence. Just one. Go to Cedar Hill Cemetery. And don't visit my grave. I read the last line again. Then again. What does that mean? Arthur's expression changed. For the first time, he looked surprised. As far as I know, he said quietly, your mother never told me why. I folded the letter carefully. My mind raced. If I wasn't supposed to visit her grave, then where was I supposed to go? As I slipped the letter back into its envelope, something fell onto the kitchen table. A tiny brass key. Old. Worn smooth with age. Attached to it was a faded paper tag in my mother's handwriting. It contained only 4 words. Plot 47. Come alone. I didn't sleep that night. The letter lay open on my dining table. I must have read it 20 times. Not because it was long, but because every sentence seemed to mean more than it said. Don't visit my grave. The words echoed in my mind until sunrise. By 8 o'clock the next morning, I was driving toward Cedar Hill Cemetery. It hadn't changed much in 20 years. The same rusted iron gates. The same narrow roads lined with towering oak trees. The same silence. Only this time, I wasn't there to remember my mother. I was there to question everything I thought I knew. The cemetery office sat near the entrance. Inside, an elderly caretaker looked up from a crossword puzzle. His name tag read, Frank Sullivan. Can I help you? I hope so. I placed the brass key on the counter. His expression froze. Only for a second. But I saw it. You recognize it. Frank didn't answer. Instead, he picked up the key with trembling fingers. I haven't seen this in. He stopped himself. Then quietly asked, where did you get it? It belonged to my mother. His face lost its color. Evelyn Bennett? My heart skipped. You knew her. I knew everyone buried here. I noticed something strange. He didn't say everyone who died. He said, everyone buried here. There was a difference. A small one, but enough to make me uneasy. Frank unlocked an old wooden cabinet behind the desk. From the bottom drawer, he removed a thick leather ledger. The pages were yellow with age. He turned them carefully until he reached one marked with a faded ribbon. Then he slid the book toward me. Plot 47. I looked down. The entry was dated 20 years earlier. Owner: Evelyn Bennett. Beneath it, one sentence had been written in blue ink. Private access authorized. No other grave in the ledger had that note. What does this mean? Frank looked toward the office window before answering. It means your mother arranged something unusual. What? I'm not supposed to tell anyone. My mother wanted me here. Frank closed the ledger. I know. His voice had become almost a whisper. She told me one day you would come. The words hit me harder than I expected. Another person. Another promise. Another secret that had been waiting 20 years. Then tell me. Frank looked at the brass key still resting in his hand. I can show you. We walked through rows of weathered headstones. The morning fog drifted low across the grass. Everything felt strangely familiar, yet completely different. After several minutes, Frank stopped. I looked up. This wasn't my mother's grave. There was no headstone, no flowers, no name, only a weathered stone building built into the hillside. An old mausoleum. Above the heavy iron door, a bronze plaque read, Private Family Archive. Frank handed me the brass key. It fits. I stared at the lock. What is this place? Frank's eyes met mine. The question isn't what it is. It's why your father never wanted you to find it. My pulse hammered in my ears. I slid the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, as if someone had been oiling it. Recently, the heavy door creaked open. Cold air drifted out. It smelled of old paper, not decay. Inside, there were no coffins, no memorials, only rows of metal filing cabinets, hundreds of them, and on the nearest cabinet, someone had taped a fresh white envelope. My mother's handwriting, waiting, as though she'd known this exact moment would come. Across the front were 6 chilling words. Someone has already been here before you. Rachel's hand trembled as she reached for the envelope. Then she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The dust covering every cabinet was untouched, except for one set of fresh footprints leading deeper into the archive. And they weren't hers. I didn't touch the envelope. Not yet. And said, I stared at the footprints. They were fresh. The thin layer of dust covering the stone floor had been disturbed only once. One trail, leading deeper into the archive. None coming back. I looked behind me. Frank was still standing outside the doorway. He hadn't moved. What is it? He called. There are footprints. His face tightened. That's impossible. Why? Because no one's had a key. He stopped. Except me. A silence settled over the room. Neither of us wanted to say the obvious. Someone else had gotten in. I pulled out my phone and switched on the flashlight. The beam stretched down a narrow corridor lined with steel cabinets. Every cabinet carried a year. Decades of carefully preserved records. The air smelled faintly of paper and cedar. No voices. No movement. Just silence. The kind that makes your own breathing sound too loud. I took one cautious step forward. Then another. The footprints continued straight ahead. Perfectly spaced. Whoever left them hadn't been running. They'd been looking for something. Halfway down the corridor, I noticed the first cabinet standing open. Its drawers had been pulled out. Folders covered the floor. Not thrown around. Searched. Methodically. Almost respectfully. Whoever had been here knew exactly what they were doing. I knelt beside one of the folders. The label read, Bennett Family, Property Records. Empty. Every document had been removed. Only the folder remained. Another cabinet. Same thing. Another empty file. This time labeled, Hospital Correspondence. Gone. My stomach tightened. Someone hadn't broken in to steal valuables. They'd come for information. Specific information. The same information my mother had wanted me to find. Rachel. Frank's voice echoed from behind. You should come back. I looked over my shoulder. Why? He didn't answer. And said, he was staring toward the far end of the archive. his eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. I stared at him. Why not? His eyes never left the opening. Because your mother told me that if anyone ever opened it before you arrived, it meant we were already too late. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, and said, I pulled free from Frank's hand, walked the remaining distance, and pushed the steel door open. The room beyond wasn't a storage vault. It was an office. Someone had been working there recently. A desk, a lamp, fresh coffee in a paper cup, a laptop, still on. Whoever had been inside had left less than a minute ago. Then I noticed the computer screen. It wasn't locked. One file filled the display. Its title froze me where I stood. Subject: Rachel Bennett. Beneath it were hundreds of dated entries. The earliest one read, May 14, 2006, age 12. The latest had been written yesterday. Hands trembling, I clicked the newest entry. It contained only one sentence. Arthur made contact today. Continue observing. Do not intervene unless she finds the final letter. I wasn't just uncovering a 20-year-old mystery anymore. Someone had been watching my life for the last 20 years. I couldn't move. The words on the screen blurred together. Subject: Rachel Bennett. My name. My life. Reduced to a file. I scrolled. The first entry was dated exactly 1 week after my mother's funeral. May 21, 2006. Rachel cried herself to sleep again. Daniel remains emotionally withdrawn. Continue observation only. My throat tightened. I kept scrolling. September 2008. Rachel refuses counseling. Shows signs of trust issues. Teacher reports social withdrawal. Another. June 2012. College application submitted. Financial assistance delivered anonymously as instructed. Another. October 2018. Minor traffic accident. No serious injuries. Legal expenses covered. Every page described moments of my life. Moments no stranger should have known. Someone hadn't just watched me. Someone had quietly protected me. For 20 years. Behind me, Frank whispered, "Close it." I didn't. Instead, I opened the next document. At the top, 3 words appeared. Project Lighthouse. Below it, a list of names. Arthur Whitmore. Frank Sullivan. Dr. Helen Morris. Michael Reeves. Several others I didn't recognize. Every name had one word beside it. Active. Retired. Deceased. It looked less like a family file, and more like an organization. What is this? Frank didn't answer. His face had turned completely pale. I've heard that name before, he whispered. But I never believed it was real. Arthur suddenly appeared in the doorway, breathing hard. Rachel. His voice echoed through the archive. You need to leave. I looked up. What is Project Lighthouse? Arthur stopped. For several seconds, he simply stared at the computer. Then he closed his eyes. I prayed you'd never find that file. My heartbeat quickened. You know what this is? Arthur nodded slowly. I know what it was supposed to be. He walked toward the desk and rested one hand on the monitor. 23 years ago. Your mother created Project Lighthouse. I frowned. My mother. She believed the truth wouldn't protect you. So she created something else. What? Arthur looked at me with tears gathering in his eyes. People. Ordinary people. People she trusted. Each one promised to protect one part of your life if she wasn't there to do it herself. I couldn't speak. The college tuition. The legal bills. The anonymous help. It wasn't coincidence. It was my mother. Even after death. Tears rolled down my face before I realized I was crying. She planned all this? Arthur nodded. She knew she wasn't going to see you grow up. So she asked us to. The room fell silent. For the first time since Arthur arrived, I didn't feel confused. I felt loved. More deeply than I ever thought possible. Then, that feeling disappeared. Because another file caught my eye. It wasn't labeled with my name. It wasn't labeled Project Lighthouse. It was labeled Breach Report. My pulse quickened. Clicked it. The report contained only 2 lines. Security compromised March 18, 2017. One member of Project Lighthouse has been secretly working against Rachel. The room seemed to tilt beneath my feet. I looked slowly at Arthur, then at Frank, then back at the list of names. One of them had betrayed my mother. One of them had spent years pretending to protect me, while secretly working for someone else. I whispered the only question that mattered. Who? Arthur's face filled with regret. He opened his mouth to answer, when a deafening crash echoed through the archive. The office window exploded inward. Glass shattered across the floor. A single stone rolled to my feet. Wrapped around it was a folded piece of paper. In bold black letters it read, "Stop reading the letters, or the next funeral will be yours." The note lay on the floor between us. "Stop reading the letters, or the next funeral will be yours." No signature. No fingerprints. Just thick black letters printed from a home computer. Arthur slowly bent down and picked it up. His hands were shaking. Not from fear. From recognition. "You've seen this before," I said. He didn't answer. He unfolded the paper completely and stared at it for several seconds. Then he whispered, "He's getting careless." My heart skipped. He. Arthur looked at me with the same expression a doctor wears before delivering bad news. I've spent 20 years hoping I was wrong. And today, I don't think I am anymore. Frank locked the archive door behind us. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked frightened. "Arthur," he said quietly, "if it's who you think it is, we need to leave." Arthur nodded. "No." I stepped between them. "No more half answers. No more secrets. My mother is dead. My father has been lying. Someone has followed me. And now someone is threatening to kill me. So tell me, who?" Arthur closed his eyes, then reached into the inside pocket of his coat. He pulled out an old photograph. It had faded around the edges. 3 people stood smiling outside a courthouse. My mother, Arthur, and a third man, late 40s, expensive suit, confident smile, the kind of face people trusted immediately. I turned the photograph over. Written on the back in my mother's handwriting were 4 words. "Never trust Victor Hale." I frowned. "Who's Victor Hale?" Arthur answered without hesitation. "My closest friend." The words hung in the air. "He was also." Arthur swallowed. "The last person to see your mother alive." Every muscle in my body tightened. "So he killed her?" "No." Arthur's answer came too quickly. "At least, I've never been able to prove that." Arthur sat heavily in an old wooden chair. "I've asked myself the same question every day for 20 years. If Victor didn't kill Evelyn, why did he spend 2 decades making sure no one ever asked how she died?" Silence. Then Frank spoke. His voice was barely audible. "Because Victor never wanted anyone to discover what happened the night." He leaned forward. "But the truth began the night before." He reached into the briefcase one more time. Not for another letter. For a small cassette tape. The old kind people recorded family memories on. Crossed the label. Written in blue ink. Were my mother's final handwritten words. "If Rachel is ready, let her hear my voice." I couldn't breathe. For 20 years, I'd forgotten what my mother's voice sounded like. Now, it was waiting inside a tape that had never been played. Arthur looked directly at me. "Rachel, I've never listened to this." I frowned. "You had it for 20 years. "I know." "Then why?" His answer chilled me. "Because your mother made me promise that the first person to hear this recording would be you." I couldn't stop staring at the cassette. It looked ordinary. A clear plastic shell. A faded white label. Nothing about it suggested it had been waiting 20 years to be heard. Yet somehow, it felt heavier than every letter combined. Arthur reached into the cabinet beneath the desk and pulled out an old cassette player. "I brought this," he said quietly. "I hoped, one day, you'd be ready." He placed it on the table between us. No one spoke. Even the rain outside seemed to disappear. My hand shook as I picked up the tape. For a moment, I couldn't do it. As long as I didn't press play, there was still a part of me that believed I hadn't forgotten her voice. I was afraid of discovering I had. I closed my eyes, took one slow breath. then pressed the button. A soft click. Static. Several long seconds of silence. Then, a woman's gentle laugh. Not words. Just a laugh. Warm. Natural. The kind that instantly made a room feel safe. Before I realized it, I was crying. Then her voice came. Soft. Steady. Exactly as I remembered. Hi, sweetheart. If you're hearing this. Then Arthur finally kept his promise. A small pause. I wish I could see your face right now. I imagine you're angry. Confused. Maybe even wondering why I would leave you with so many questions. A quiet breath. I'm sorry. If I had another choice, I would have spent every birthday beside you. Instead, I had to leave you something stronger than my presence. The truth. I looked down. A tear landed on the cassette player. No one in the room moved. It felt wrong to interrupt her. Rachel, I need you to remember something before you listen to anyone else. Your father loved you. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. But love can make ordinary people do extraordinary things. Sometimes, the people trying hardest to protect you become the very people hiding the truth from you. Arthur quietly wiped his eyes. Frank lowered his head. Neither of them seemed surprised, as if they'd carried those words inside themselves for years. Then Evelyn's voice changed. Not frightened, determined. If you've reached this point, it means someone has already tried to stop you. That means I was right. Rachel. The danger never ended with my death. It simply learned to wait. My heart began pounding. I leaned closer to the speaker. Tomorrow. Go to St. Andrew's Hospital. Don't ask for my records. Ask for room 214. The room remembers what people don't. A long silence followed. Then, almost in a whisper, she spoke one final sentence. And whatever you do, don't tell Victor Hale you're looking. The tape clicked. Silence. It was over. 20 years. Reduced to 4 minutes and 38 seconds. I stared at the machine. I don't understand. There isn't enough. There are still too many questions. Arthur slowly picked up the cassette. There was supposed to be another recording. I looked up sharply. Another one? He nodded. Evelyn made 2 tapes. I've only ever had one. The room fell silent. Frank looked at Arthur in disbelief. You never told me there were 2. Arthur's face tightened. Because I didn't realize the second one was missing. Until this morning. Just then, Rachel's phone vibrated. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. Then another message appeared. No words. Just a photograph. It had been taken less than a minute earlier. It showed the 3 of them standing inside the archive. Someone had photographed them from outside the window, and beneath the image, a single sentence. You're already 1 clue behind. I didn't sleep. Not because of the threats. Not because of Victor Hale. Not even because someone had photographed us inside the archive. I couldn't sleep because of my mother's voice. For 20 years I'd convinced myself I had forgotten it. Now it echoed through every quiet moment. The room remembers what people don't. I kept repeating the sentence as I drove towards St. Andrew's Hospital the next morning. The building looked older than I expected. Brown brick. Long hallways. The kind of hospital that had witnessed thousands of beginnings, and just as many endings. I walked to the reception desk. A young woman smiled politely. Can I help you? I remembered my mother's words. Don't ask for my records. I need to know where room 214 is. Her smile faded. 2nd floor. She hesitated. But that room has been closed for years. The elevator felt unusually slow. Every floor seemed to take forever. When the doors opened, the 2nd floor was almost silent. Half the lights had been switched off. The west wing looked abandoned. A small sign pointed toward room 214. The hallway smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paint. A faded wooden door stood slightly open. The brass numbers, 214, were scratched and worn with age. I pushed gently. The room was empty. No bed. No equipment. Just sunlight falling through dusty blinds. For a moment, I wondered if I'd misunderstood the recording. Then I noticed something. Every room in the hallway had white walls. Room 214 didn't. One wall had been repainted. Recently. The color matched almost perfectly. Almost. I stepped closer, running my fingers across the surface. One section sounded different. Hollow. A soft knock. Again. Definitely hollow. Just then, a voice behind me said, I was wondering when someone would find it. I spun around. An elderly janitor stood in the doorway holding a mop. His name badge read, Samuel Ortiz. He looked at the wall, then back at me. Evelyn always said you were curious. My heart pounded. You knew my mother? Samuel smiled sadly. I was working the night she died. Everything inside me froze. You were here. I was. He nodded slowly. I heard the argument. What argument? His expression darkened. The one your mother never wanted you to hear. I stepped toward him. Who was arguing with her? Samuel opened his mouth, then stopped. His eyes shifted past my shoulder, toward the hallway. His face lost all color. They found you faster than I expected. What? He whispered. Don't turn around. Oh, I did. The hallway was empty, except for one man. Dark suit, hands in his pockets, standing perfectly still, watching me. No expression, no movement, just watching. When our eyes met, he smiled, not warmly, knowingly. Then he turned and calmly walked away. I ran into the hallway. Hey, no answer. By the time I reached the elevator, it was already descending. The security camera above the doors blinked its tiny red light, recording everything. I hurried downstairs. Did you see the man who just left? The receptionist frowned. What man? The man in the gray suit. She looked confused. I haven't seen anyone leave this floor in the last 10 minutes. A cold chill spread through me. I turned toward the glass entrance doors. A familiar blue sedan pulled away from the curb. Slowly, almost casually, as if it had been waiting. Back upstairs, Samuel was gone. So was his mop. The room stood empty again. But on the windowsill, where he had been standing, lay a folded yellow sticky note. Written in hurried handwriting were 6 words. Victor Hale didn't kill your mother. Below that, one final sentence. He only buried the truth. I didn't tell Arthur about Samuel. Not yet. Something about the old janitor's fear stayed with me. He hadn't looked scared of Victor Hale. He'd looked scared of being seen talking to me. Those aren't the same thing. By the time I reached home, it was almost dark. My father was sitting on my front porch. Daniel Bennett. He still carried himself the way I remembered from childhood. Straight back, pressed shirts, polished shoes. The kind of man who believed that if you looked composed, people would never notice you were falling apart. He stood the moment he saw me. I've been calling. I looked at my phone. 12 missed calls. 7 voice messages. I hadn't heard any of them. I needed to talk to you. His voice wasn't angry. It was desperate. I unlocked the front door without answering. He followed me inside. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then his eyes landed on the envelope lying on my dining table. He froze. Arthur found you. It wasn't a question. You knew. I turned toward him. You knew he had Mom's letters. Daniel slowly lowered himself into a chair. I hoped he'd never have to deliver them. A strange sadness crossed his face. Not guilt. Not fear. Regret. Deep, exhausting regret. I folded my arms. Then start talking. He looked down at his wedding ring, twisting it the way he always did when he was nervous. I promised your mother I'd never lie to you. He gave a bitter laugh. And then I spent 20 years doing exactly that. The room fell silent. I need one answer. I took a step closer. How did Mom really die? Daniel closed his eyes. When people ask that question, they're usually asking about the final 5 minutes. He looked up at me. But your mother didn't die because of 5 minutes. She died because of one decision. What decision? He swallowed hard. Mine. I felt the floor disappear beneath me. I don't understand. I destroyed the only evidence that could have saved her. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. What evidence? Daniel stood and walked toward the window. Rain streaked across the glass. It wasn't supposed to happen. I thought I was protecting our family. He turned to face me. I never imagined it would cost Evelyn her life. Tears filled his eyes. For the first time in my life, I saw my father cry. Not quietly. Not politely. He broke. I've replayed that night every day for 20 years. I've wished, 1,000 times, that I'd made a different choice. I wanted to believe him. Part of me still did. But another part remembered my mother's voice. Love and truth are not always the same thing. I reached into my bag and placed the sticky note from Samuel on the table. Daniel read it. His face turned completely white. Victor Hale didn't kill your mother. He only buried the truth. His hands began to shake. Where did you get this? Room 214. The color drained from his face. He spoke to you. Who? Samuel. I nodded. He said he heard the argument the night Mom died. Daniel whispered something I almost didn't hear. He was never supposed to survive. Silence. I stared at him. What did you just say? Daniel looked as if he'd realized too late what had slipped out. Before he could answer, someone knocked on the front door. 3 slow knocks. Exactly the same rhythm Arthur had used. I walked toward the door. Daniel grabbed my arm. Hard. Don't open it. Why? His voice cracked. Because. If Samuel found you, then Victor already knows where you live. I looked through the peephole. No one was there. Only a small cardboard box sitting on the welcome mat. My name was written across the top. In my mother's handwriting. I carried the box inside. Daniel stared at it as though he'd seen a ghost. Very slowly, I lifted the lid. Inside was an old disposable camera, 1 roll of undeveloped film, and a note. Just 6 words. The truth was never in the letters. For nearly 5 minutes, neither my father nor I touched the box. The old disposable camera sat between us. 20 years of silence, compressed into 1 small roll of undeveloped film. Finally, my father spoke. Rachel, you don't have to do this. I looked at him. No, I think I do. An hour later, I walked into the only photography shop in town that still developed film. The owner looked almost surprised when he saw the camera. Haven't seen one of these in years. How long? I asked. He smiled. About an hour. It felt like the longest hour of my life. When he handed me the envelope, my hands were shaking. 12 photographs. Nothing more. Nothing less. I sat in my car, locked the doors, and slowly pulled out the first picture. It showed my parents, standing in our backyard. My mother was smiling. Nothing unusual. The second, my mother hugging me on my 12th birthday. Our family eating dinner. Normal. Almost painfully normal. Then came the fourth. My heartbeat stopped. Victor Hale stood in our living room. He wasn't arguing. He wasn't threatening anyone. He was crying. Actually crying. My mother was holding his hands, trying to comfort him. I frowned. That was impossible. Villains don't cry. The 5th photograph answered 1 question and created 10 more. My pulse quickened. I turned over the photograph. On the back, my mother's handwriting. The truth starts with Michael. I didn't wait. I drove straight to Arthur's office. When he saw the photographs, he slowly removed his glasses. I hoped she'd never kept these. You knew. I knew they existed. I never knew where. I placed the photo of the file on his desk. Who was Michael Bennett? Arthur closed his eyes, then quietly answered. The only innocent man in the room. Everything inside me froze. What? Arthur took a long breath. 20 years ago. Victor Hale was the district attorney. Your father was the lead investigator. Your uncle Michael was arrested for a murder he didn't commit. I stared at him. No. Arthur nodded. The evidence was fabricated. My stomach turned. Who fabricated it? Arthur looked toward the window. Not Victor. Not your father. I whispered. Then who? Arthur's voice became almost inaudible. The police chief. He continued. Your mother discovered the truth. She found the real evidence. She planned to expose everyone involved. So why didn't she? Arthur's eyes filled with tears. Because someone threatened you. The room became completely silent. They told Evelyn, if she released the evidence, you wouldn't live to see your 13th birthday. I couldn't breathe. Suddenly, everything made sense. The delayed letters, the lies, the fear, the silence. My mother hadn't stayed quiet because she was weak. She stayed quiet because she chose her daughter over justice. Arthur reached into his desk drawer. Very carefully, he placed one final sealed envelope in front of me. The paper looked newer than the others. Across the front, my mother's handwriting looked slightly different, as though she'd been struggling to write. It read, "Only after you know why I stayed silent." My fingers touched the seal. Arthur quietly stopped me. Not yet. I looked up. Why? His voice cracked. Because before you read your mother's last words, there's one person who has spent 20 years waiting to tell you. He was sorry. I turned toward the office door. It slowly opened. Victor Hale walked inside. Older. Gray-haired. His confident smile gone. He wasn't carrying a lawyer. He wasn't carrying security. He wasn't carrying excuses. Only a worn leather folder. And tears in his eyes. Victor placed the folder on Arthur's desk. He looked directly at me, then quietly said the sentence that changed everything. Rachel, I didn't spend 20 years hiding the truth from you. A long silence. Then he whispered, I spent 20 years trying to keep the people who killed your mother from finishing what they. For several seconds, no one spoke. Victor Hale stood in the doorway, looking nothing like the powerful attorney whose name had haunted my mother's letters. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind you carry for 20 years. He slowly placed the leather folder on Arthur's desk. I've rehearsed this conversation every day. And I still don't know where to begin. I didn't sit. I didn't offer him sympathy. I asked only one question. Did you kill my mother? Victor met my eyes. No. I failed her. But I didn't kill her. He opened the folder. Inside were copies of police reports, court filings, and one handwritten statement signed by 3 people. Arthur. Victor. My father. Victor took a slow breath. 20 years ago, your Uncle Michael was framed for a murder committed by the police chief's son. My pulse quickened. Your mother found the proof. She came to me first. I told her we'd expose everyone. He looked down. I underestimated how dangerous they were. He slid one final document toward me. A sworn statement. My mother's signature at the bottom. Across the top. One sentence. If anything happens to me, this was not an accident. The date was the day before she died. Everything inside me went still. Victor continued. The night before your mother died, she met with your father. He begged her not to release the evidence. I turned sharply toward Daniel. Tears streamed down his face. I wasn't protecting myself. He whispered. I was protecting you. They showed me photographs. They knew your school. They knew your bus route. They knew where you played after class. His voice broke. They told me if Evelyn released those files, they'd bury our daughter next. Silence. The kind that hurts. For 20 years, I'd believed my father chose lies over my mother. The truth was worse. He chose me, and lost her anyway. Victor looked at me. Evelyn made one final decision. She hid the evidence. She asked Arthur to protect the letters. And she asked me to spend the rest of my life making sure the people responsible never discovered where the original evidence had gone. I frowned. But the camera? Victor gave a sad smile. The photographs weren't the evidence. They were the map. Arthur quietly reached beneath his desk. For the first time, he unlocked a drawer no one had touched all afternoon. Inside lay a weathered children's storybook. Its cover was faded. I recognized it instantly. My mother used to read it to me every night. Arthur opened the back cover. Hidden inside, sealed beneath the cardboard, was a thin flash drive. He placed it in my hand. Your mother hid the truth. Inside the one thing no one would ever think to steal. Hours later, state investigators confirmed everything. The flash drive contained scanned documents, financial records, recorded conversations, and enough evidence to reopen the case against the former police chief. and everyone who helped cover it up. Several of the men involved were already dead. Others were old, respected, retired. They believed time had buried the truth. It hadn't. It had only delayed it. 3 months later, the courthouse was full. Not because of a criminal trial. Because the state was officially clearing Michael Bennett's name. Every major news station was there. Families, reporters, former officers, the people who had built careers on silence. One by one, the findings were read into the public record. No dramatic speeches. No shouting. No revenge. Just facts. Dates. Documents. Evidence. Each sentence quietly dismantled the lies that had survived for 2 decades. The former police chief never looked at me once. He kept staring at the table, as though avoiding my eyes might somehow erase the truth. That was the revenge. Not humiliation. Not anger. Watching the mask he'd worn for 20 years fall away, because of his own choices. A week later, I drove back to Cedar Hill Cemetery. This time, I walked straight to my mother's grave. For the first time, I didn't have questions, only gratitude. I placed the final unopened envelope against the headstone. Then I broke the seal. Inside was a single page. Only a few lines. My dearest Rachel, if you're reading this, then you proved me right. You became the woman I always believed you would be. If the truth reached you, don't let it turn into hatred. Justice heals. Hatred only chooses a new victim. Forgive the people who were afraid. Never forgive the choices that stole innocent lives. And when you think of me, don't remember the day I died. Remember the life we shared before fear entered it. That is where I will always be waiting for you. Love always, Mom. I folded the letter carefully, placed my hand against the cold stone, and for the first time in 20 years, I cried without feeling lost. The wind moved gently through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, church bells began to ring. I smiled, not because everything had been repaired. Some things never are. I smiled because my mother had been right. She hadn't waited 20 years because the truth needed time. She waited because I did. If you've ever wondered whether the truth always wins, doesn't. Sometimes, the truth simply survives, waiting for someone strong enough to carry it.